it's the GPS.
Is the GPS good, or do we know where we are? A couple of things. So two people came up and told me some very cool tips that I wanted to pass along. I can only remember one right now, but they'll hopefully come back to me, or you guys can share, but tell me again. But one of the things you can do in your project is set up SQL command variables, and then you can use those in your post-deployment script to do stuff conditionally, right? So you guys use it for as an environment variable, and you can just set it and say, okay, well, you know, we're deploying to dev, so here's what the user should be, or here's what the permission should be. Now we're going to QA, so here's what they should be. So the post-deployment script just has a check for that SQL command variable, and you can make stuff happen conditionally. Very cool tip, I like that. What was the other one? What was the other tip?
Oh, but generating the DAC pack out of SS.
Oh, yeah. So in SQL Server Management Studio, and I totally forgot that you could do this, and I've done it lots of times, so I don't know why I forgot. In SQL Server Management Studio, if you right-click on a database and go to Tasks, one of the tasks on the menu is create a DAC pack. So you can actually generate a DAC pack right out of SQL Server Management Studio and then use that to import into Visual Studio. A couple other things before I leave here, Visual Studio. With a DAC pack, so sometimes, anybody have a database that references another database? That's a pain in the butt, isn't it? So that really causes a problem here, because now when I try to compile this thing, I get all kinds of compile errors and warnings that say, I don't know what that object is. You're referencing a proc I don't know anything about. But what you can do is go into references, and you can add a database reference. And that can either be, if the database, you know, if it just so happens that both your databases live in the same solution in Visual Studio, then you can just do a project reference, just like in C#. So you can say, go to my references, add a reference, and I can do database projects. I don't have another one, that's why it's not letting me. But if I did, I could pick that and then just pick my other database, and it'll just reference across through the project. Or, if I got the DAC pack of that database, then I can browse for it and put it right in here and reference the DAC pack. So I'm referencing all the objects in that. A DAC pack, which oddly enough leads us to our next topic. A DAC pack is the whole database without the data. Right? It's everything. It's a compressed bunch of XML and SQL files that represent the database schema. So everything that you have in your project is in that DAC pack. So all the tables, all the stored procedures, all the views, triggers, whatever you've got. If you're storing users and permissions and that, then they're all in there as well. It's all inside that DAC pack. One other thing before I go here. There's so many things that you can look at in here. I always, because I kind of promised I would show you this. If you go to the project and say add, you can add a script, and then from here I can have one post-deployment and one pre-deployment script per project. So if I create my post-deployment script, then it just puts that in there, and it will, when you generate a DAC pack, that will go with it. And when you do your schema compare, and you generate a script to update the database, the very end of the changes will include this post-deployment script, and the beginning will include the pre-deployment script. So they always get included with whatever you're deploying. Make sense?
Said you can have one.
You can have one, but it can call other ones. You have one script.
See it putting the number one on the end of it, which suggests it can handle multiple.
No, you can have one, and unfortunately, because, let me show you. Because when you go to project properties, no, I gotta remember where the heck this is. There's this. What's that? There's a spot where it says.
You have to specify with the script.
Oh, right here. See, it's the build action is this is post deploy. But if I try to make another one and try to set it to post deploy, it'll turn this one off or warn me and say you already have one. But it can. But if you let me see. I think this example.
What you said earlier is you can use that one script to call other scripts.
Right. So here's a post deployment script that just calls another script that adds a table or inserts columns into a table.
Is that-
So I've just got a bunch of junk around it, but essentially it's just calling into a scripts folder in my project where all my post-deployment scripts are.
This is SQL command.
Yeah, this is that one I was talking about, or an example of the one where you can call MS for each table. Can't remember what that stands for. And it actually, you just pass it the string alter table. The question mark gets replaced in the prod by every table that it finds, and it just turns off all the constraints. And then it deletes all the data and lets you reinsert it all from your scripts, and then turns the constraints all back on again.
So it doesn't drop them and recreate them.
No, it's just the data.
No, it doesn't consider check constraints on, it's just.
But you guys chat. There's lots of ways. Other people have had other ways to do it. That was just one. I mean, that's kind of a special case, right? It's a database full of code tables. There's no user data in it. Like it's all code, right? So it's a little easier to handle when it's all real code. Because code table data is code, right? It's not user data. It's code. I'll argue that one if anybody wants to. You're gonna ask?
Yeah, as far as referencing other scripts features on the databases, what if it's referencing scripts features on the server?
Well, so that's okay. As long as you go get the DAC pack, if you go to that database and generate a DAC pack, and then store the DAC pack in version control or wherever you want to, then you make a reference to this, and that will resolve that. You can compile this project. The goal is just, it's like having a reference to a DLL, right? I can either reference another project, or I can reference a DLL directly, and I got to have that DLL somewhere. It's the compiled version of the code. The DAC pack is just the compiled version
It's
of
the
the
type
database.
library.
What's that?
It's the type library.
Yeah, right.
It is.
Yeah, the type library, yeah. That make sense? Right, so the DAC pack, I said everything was on this slide already. The DAC pack is, when you build a SQL project, you get a DAC pack, and the DAC pack just contains everything that you had in the project. So it is now a binary representation of my database. Right? It's just a bunch of XML files. It'll have a pre and a post deployment script if you have those. If we go into here, let's just pop into our Northwind, bin, debug, and I'm just going to go to the DAC pack. Why am I not getting? Usually it says unpack. I'm missing something on this in this machine, obviously. Let's try this.
Virtual machine?
Yeah, it's. So I always used to do this demo in. I have a VM that I keep on my machine, but it was all 2015. I thought, oh, nobody wants to see 2015. They want to see some newer stuff. So I thought I'd put my databases in Azure, use my 2017. But how'd you do that? How did I do that?
I lost the GPS signal.
That's I don't know. I'm still plugged in. Does anybody know what?
Did you switch over to your VM?
I don't know what.
When he left his VM and had the slide up.
Let me see if I. Hang on.
Oh!
Okay, let's see if I can do it in here. So see, I've obviously got something installed on my machine that isn't in that VM. The VM, by the way, does anybody use Azure VMs? They're great, because you can just go into Azure. I'm not going to change topics on us here, but you can just go into Azure and I want to learn to play with something new. And you can just create a VM from a bunch of templates. You can create friggin' Linux. You can create one that already has Visual Studio installed on it, one that has all kinds of, loads of them. So that's what I'm using. I'm using a Visual Studio 2017 Azure VM.
Did you install SQL packages?
What's that?
SQL packages, you have to install.
Yeah,
SQL links or-
I assumed they did. That's probably what I'm missing. Yeah, it should be there, shouldn't it?
It's separately. It's
Even in
a
2017?
It's a pain. It's in 17 that they separated. It's
Oh.
together.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's the DAC pack uncompressed. So there's just a bunch of stuff that I got nothing here. I'll open everything in Notepad. So see, there's there's my model, a create statement for each of my objects. Looks beautiful when it isn't color coded, eh?
Yeah, no plus in there.
This is, what did I open? Oh, this is the model XML. So it shows, I believe it has constraints and stuff in it. And it kind of has an XML representation of what the constraints are between objects. We're not going to dig through these all, don't worry. And one of them should also have my version number in it. There's my version 1.1.0.0 that I had set in the thing. So when I build, it builds with that version number right now. So every time you hear DACPack, or I've been saying DACPack, that's what it is. It is just it's a build of my SQL project. And now it is a representation of the database, though, that I can use as a reference. I can use to compare to a database to get a report back to see what the differences are between them. And this is how we manage the differences between what's in version control and what's in the database. But instead, we don't store a DACPack in version control. We actually store the source, the insert statements and the create statements. And then when we build, the build artifact gives us a DACPack that we compare. So remember my very first slide, I said, treat it like an application. Well, it's the same thing, right? And we don't store the DLL of an application, of version control. Do we? Everyone say no. You don't do that. We store the source. And then we have a build server that builds that source into a DLL, and then we take that DLL and do whatever we need to do with it. Either use it as a reference, put it into NuGet. I'd like DACPacks to be able to go into NuGet. I think that would be good. And then we can make NuGet references to DACPacks from a SQL project. Nobody's done that yet. So let's talk about build automation and what I'm going to do with that. So let me just jump back into my in here. Okay. Actually, let's take the change that I made. A couple of things I'm going to get rid of, though, because I really don't need them. So I'm going to go to my pending changes, and I don't need this script, really. I just did that to show you guys, so we'll get rid of that. That change. Yeah, I'll get rid of this. I'll just keep the provinces table. So let's undo that. Yeah, and I'll get rid of this too. Okay, so just to get myself back to, if I really wanted to play this demo safe, I would undo everything and re-add the provinces table. But because I'm not sure what else I did in there, so here we go. So many people use VSTS or TFS or any tool. I don't care what, but you use, right? So in VSTS, I showed you I've got a task set up. So let's go over to my work tab, and it should show my task list here. So there it is, add provinces. So that's sitting in this list because it's assigned to me. I'm going to drag it up here to let everybody know that I'm working on it. And then I've got my one change, which is to add the table. So let's check this in. So now I'm checking in against the work item. Also a good idea, because now I got some context. I always put a comment on my check-ins, because you guys always put comments in your check-ins. Beautiful. So we'll check that in. Apparently I changed the solution. I better save that. So we've checked it in. Beautiful. So now it's in source control. Let's jump over into VSTS and take a look at our build. So I've set up a build already for this. And I've already been here before and talked about builds and releases, so I'm not going to bore you with that part. Although it was a pretty old version, eh? I think the last time I was here I did releases, didn't I? Didn't I do Release Manager? Mm-hmm. And that was the old Release Manager. Things change quickly. So I got a Northman database build here. A couple of things in the build that are might be of interest. I'm setting up a version number. I'm getting a build number, and I want to be able to version my applications in my database. So I've set up a couple of variables. One's called major, one's called minor, so that I can increment these numbers. So at any point, I can say, okay, now we're doing version 1.5, and I just change my build definition, and everything I build from now on is 1.5. And then over here on options, I actually set the build number. So my build number is going to use those variables, major, minor, and then year, the day of the year, and a rev. So my build number will always be 1.5.17249, or whatever the day of the year is, and then .1, if it was the first one today, .2, so on and so forth. And that's the number that'll get set in my database. And that number will be a label in version control on the code. So now I can always look at a database, a physical database sitting in UAT, QA, prod, wherever it happens to be. I can look at that version number and I can go back and pull the source that created it. That's important for any kind of application. Okay, and then I've got a bunch of tasks. So, what kinds of things am I doing in my build here? Well, I'm setting the build number on the assembly info file. So my database project doesn't have an assembly info file, but my tests do, right? So I got tests. I got a test project, and it's going to have a DLL that's going to execute when I run the tests. So I want to version it so I know that I got the right tests for the right database. So I'm versioning that. Here's my PowerShell script for versioning the DAC pack, and because I'm in VSTS and in my own in this virtual machine. Here it is here. I've just shoved a PowerShell script that looks for SQL proj files and changes that DAC version number, the build number. But normally I would in TFS I would create my own task so that when I went to add a task to my build, it would just be one of the things in the list. It would just be change DAC version number. Let's not worry about token files. It's not really important for this. And then my build is just a Visual Studio build, right? Because it's a Visual Studio project and solution. I can just build that solution. So I can just drag in my Visual Studio build from my task list and tell it what solution I wanted to build. And then the last thing I do is I create artifacts. So what you do in a build in VSTS is you create build artifacts. So I happen to have two different build artifacts. One of them is the database itself, and the other one is my unit tests that I want to be able to execute against it. So now, if we go back, I don't think I changed anything there. Nope, it's letting me out. So I'm going to queue up a build. And it's a hosted build, so we're actually doing all this in Azure. The build server's in Azure. And VSTS, of course. So I'm running a build. Here we go. We can go in and watch the build run. Yeah, this is where we wait for Azure to give us a build agent. It shouldn't take long. It usually takes a couple of seconds, but hopefully it won't take long. So some of the things that we get on the build while we're waiting for this, every time I've checked in against my database, I'm going to get a change set listing on the build. So I know what changes were made. Every time I check in against a task or a story or a backlog item or whatever it happens to be, that's going to get attached to the build as well. So a build comes with its own, all the information about what's gone into this build. And we do this, everybody just does this naturally for their VB.NET and their C# apps. And you can do it for a database, so why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we do this? It just makes sense. So execute the build, it's doing all this stuff. Something's gone wrong. Oh, what did I do? I couldn't find post-deployment 1. Why is it even looking for post-deployment 1? Did you not? Did I not? Yeah. Oh, I thought I deleted it though.
You remove it from the change.
Okay, let's delete it. Let's delete it. Oh, you know why? Because I didn't check in the solution today. That's what you're saying.
You did check in the solution, but
I thought
at
it-
a project level?
No. Are you sure? I thought I said. Did I say? Okay, well let's try it anyway. Let's try it. Check in. Removed. Post deploy. Script. All right. The nice thing is, it's quick and easy. Oh, we got an agent quickly this time.
So because you deleted the script, it's gonna automatically update the property page to not look for that script anymore, is that correct?
Yes. Yes. Should. You know what I just broke a terrible rule. I just removed an object out of here, checked it in. I didn't even compile to make sure that I at least can compile the project. Terrible. That's good. Okay, and it's running, so hopefully this, fingers crossed. So once we get a build artifact, we'll do a deployment. But I'm actually going to deploy into dev, and then we're going to deploy it from there. We'll approve that and deploy it to QA and then to production. Now, one of the really.
No.
What's that?
You wanted to be a cowboy.
Yeah, I know. See, I even warned you. I even said. Okay.
It looks like it happened a step earlier this time.
Yeah, you know what we're going to do?
Go in the wrong direction.
Let's go. Let's do this. The other beautiful thing about version control. Today, yeah. So if I roll back,
It's to that one.
I want this one, right? Let's get that version. I think. That should be. I think that's the right version. Although I don't know if I get that version. I did, which is I'm okay with. But I want to get this back into. I want to get from that. I want to roll these two back. Is what I want to do. I think that'll roll back both of those, right? Oh, see, as soon as you start. Oh yeah, because let's do this. Get latest. Try that again. Roll back. Yeah, and we'll take the. Okay. Okay, we're going to try this one more time. You ready? See, because it's in version control, we can do this quick though. Provinces. And we're going to leave it called an ID. We're going to cheat a whole bunch here to save us time and do that. And let's rebuild solution. I'm going to turn that off because we really don't need that right now. Rebuild that guy. Okay, here goes. Let's see. Check in. Back to original. We hope. Okay. If this doesn't work, we're going to go look at the release anyway. But we may not actually release provinces. Serves me right for mucking around too much.
It's annoying, but you want it to blow up here, not in production, so this is still good.
Right. Yeah, this is all on purpose. This is just to show you. Yeah, you're right, exactly. You do want it to. This is where you want it to blow up, is when you're building and deploying the dev. So while it's going, let's save ourselves a little bit of time and go take a quick look at. Now it's running. No, I can't stop watching it. Let's go take a quick look at what happens in a release. So in Release Manager, I've got a Northwind database release set up. And in here, you can see I've got three environments. I've got dev, QA, and production. I've actually also got some conditions on these. So if you look at post-deployment condition on dev, no, sorry, the pre-deployment condition on QA is that Dave Lloyd needs to approve this. So what's nice about having tools like this is I've checked in like provinces table change, and now I run a build, and that's just going to automatically deploy into dev. As developers of the database, we can go in and validate the provinces table is working okay, or referencing it, whatever, it's behaving the way it should, and then we just approve that and say, yep, this is good to go to QA, and VSTS takes care of the rest of it. It just moves the provinces table into QA for us now. And then once the person in QA is ready for that change, they accept it, and then it goes. And I'll show you, hopefully, how this works. That is exciting. Okay, so first of all, the first thing I got over here in my release is my artifacts, right? So from the build, so when you look at a build, let's just have a quick look at the build report. So here's my build report. You can see there are my change sets that I checked in, and here's my work item that's been included in this, so I know it's been added. Here are the artifacts that it created. So there's my Northwind database, and I can explore that. And see, there's the files I need. So there's my publish profile, there's my DACPAT. And here's my unit tests that I can execute. Okay, so these are my artifacts that I need to pick up in a release to be deployed. So back over to the release, right here is where I say, okay, well, what artifacts do you want? And I can pull artifacts from multiple builds. I can say I need this artifact and that artifact and this artifact, and they all go into this deployment. So I bring in my artifacts, and then I set up any pre and post deployment options that I need on every environment. And by the way, I can set up environments to do all kinds of crazy things. Like watch, if I wanted to have dark deployments or something, or I wanted to deploy to two QAs at the same time, one's UAT, one's QA, or every time we get to QA or we're happy with QA, we want to create a training database, then I can do stuff like this and automatically deploy into two places at the same time from there. So once it's done this one, it'll move to both of these. But they'll also have their own pre-deployment conditions and can have different people saying, yes, I'm ready for this. This could be HR for training, and this could be CAD for production. Right? Let's get rid of that guy. We don't really want him because, see, this is how I get into trouble. And then, of course, for each of these, it's a different database, right? I mean, I've got a Northwind Dev database. I've got a Northwind QA database. They're likely running on different servers. So I have to be able to manage that as well. So under my variables, you can see here I've got a variable name, a value, and its scope. So the database name is Northwind Dev in the dev environment, and it's Northwind QA in the QA environment. It's just Northwind in the production environment. So these are variables that I can use in my release to tell it what to set at the time it's doing that release. So if I go back to my task and look at dev and go to my deploy Northwind schema, you can see down here it's got my Azure stuff, blah, 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 like you would expect. But then there's a variable that says use the server for whatever environment you happen to be in. So if you're doing dev, grab the dev variable. If you're doing QA, grab the QA variable. There's the database name is also a variable. My user ID and password that's stuff I can't let out. I don't want anybody knowing what that is, right? I got some kind of service account that lets me create databases. You got to be careful with this kind of stuff. So what you can do is you can create a variable list. So see here my variable groups. So I've got Azure Credentials 2, and there's my user ID and password, and my user ID is blocked. You can't see it. Nobody can go in and look at that. I can actually set that up in my library as Azure Credentials. I can have an administrator come in and add all the service account and credentials, and then I can use them in my build and release and never know what the password is. Cool, right? You can say cool, it's okay. Okay. So to the last thing we want to talk about, I say that, but I'll think of something else. So back into my, there we go. So back into my tasks. So these are the tasks I want to do. So the first one is replace tokens. So if I have a config file that has a connection string in it or a reference to a web service or whatever, the stuff you typically put in a config file because it's needed by the app, but it changes in every environment. Then you use a token replacer. You put tokens in your config file and replace them with the variables that are in this list right here. So I could have in there, I could have a database, DB name, server name, whatever they happen to be, token, and it'll replace them in my config file prior to deployment. There's my deploy. So this is actually a special task. So if you see, this is a list of all the things that I have built into VSTS that I can add to this. And these, there's tons of stuff in here, like just tons of stuff. It's amazing. You can look at it by, if I go to deploy, you can look at it by category. So the one I'm using is somewhere in here, there's an Azure SQL database deployment. So that's the one I grabbed. And I just pulled that in and set the parameters. And it worked. It was super easy.
And this is a facade for what, MS Build on Azure?
No, this is a script that gets executed to do whatever it needs to do to deploy a database to Azure. So look, if I look in here for build, look, you can do Android, you can do Docker stuff. Anybody's doing Docker, I don't know, Grunt, Gulp, Jenkins, Maven. So you could be doing Java stuff, you could do Xamarin, there's a whole bunch of Xamarin stuff in here I'm sure Lori has told you about or will tell you about at some point. Xamarin iOS and Android. Xcode. So there's just, these are all the tools that are built into the build and release for VSTS. And if there's something, so when I do builds for people, I'm working at a client right now where I'm building MATLAB scripts into DLLs. Anybody ever use MATLAB? Any scientists in the room? So they're all data scientists. So MATLAB is a tool by MathWorks that crunches numbers. And so I'm building MATLAB stuff. I never, I'm a C# developer. I was a Power Builder developer at one time, for gosh sakes. But they didn't, there's no MATLAB compiler in here. But I made my own. Super easy. And then if you go to the marketplace, so here's all the stuff that's in the marketplace that isn't in that list. So you want to call, Octopus or, I don't know, I could name something. Name something that, so here's this IIS web deploy, by the way. This is a funny one. This guy lets me set up IIS. It's got 3 tasks. It'll let me set up IIS for web deployment. It'll do the web deployment, so it'll call MS deploy, and it'll do a SQL Server database deployment. So it'll call SQL package to deploy your database. Those 3 tools come in this one package that you can just install into your VSTS for free. Tons and tons and tons of stuff. So these, and it's the same with the build, right? If we go back and look at the build, and I edit that, it's just a set of tasks that I brought in. So there's the tasks that I'm doing, and they just come out of this list of tools that are available to us. So meanwhile, let's go back and try and deploy this thing, shall we? Okay, so I'm going to go to my old definitions for a sec. I'll pick Northwind Data. So this would be a list of all my releases. So I'm just going to pick this one and say create a release. So what I have now is a release definition. Now I'm saying create a release, and I'm telling it which build I want to deploy. So I can actually go back builds. If I wanted to, I could go back. Like if something crazily went wrong with this build, I go back a build and just redeploy it. That easy. So I'm going to create my latest build that has my provinces in it, fingers crossed. And away it goes. You see this little link here is a link that takes me to the release itself. So this release is going on. If I go over to the logs, I can watch. So it's waiting for that. So while it's waiting, that's okay. We'll take a look at a couple other quick things while it's trying to get an agent. So if I go to my Northwind database, this is kind of cool. These are all my builds, and these are my environments. So you can see it's, build 298.1 release 1 successfully was deployed to dev, QA, and production. So I get a little history of that. If you look here, you can see that 326.1 made it into dev and QA, but it's waiting approval to get to production, so it's not in production yet. If I'm the person, the reason I see that is because I'm the person that gets to approve it. So if I'm that person, I can just click here and say, yeah, I approve that. And once I do that, it'll deploy to production, which is what we'll do if our deployment doesn't work, because that one will. And then you can go look at this overview. Love this view. So this is...
Can you go back to that screen real quick?
Yeah.
What if you had a release, so what if this release was dependent on something in the prior release but didn't make it to production? Will it stop this release from going into production?
No, you would have managed that
But much earlier. Okay.
much earlier. Yeah, you would have...
Yeah.
Yeah.
we would have had that.
Yeah. So if you go back to, the overview. So this just shows me all my environments. So imagine this screen. If I could just show you a customer screen, you'd love it. I've got one customer that they must have between 50 and 75 releases, applications that they release. And it's everything from C# apps to Neuron, Duck Creek, SSIS, SQL Server databases. Everything is automatically released. And what you see on this screen is just a list of all the different environments. So each stream has a set of environments. Some of them only have dev, QA, production. Some of them have a UAT. Some of them have a training. Some of them have a 2 productions. They've just got multiple different. And you can look at this screen as one big view of what build is in what environment. So I can see what build numbers made it. So you can see 326.1 is in dev and QA, but 304.2 is in production. And when you think about the traceability here, if I clicked on QA, clicked on that release, so here's my release. This is the release as it happened. And here's my build. So if I want to know what was in this release, I can go in now and click on the build, and it'll take me to the build and show me what's in the build, because it's going to show me the check-ins and the work items. Yeah?
Does this have a way to take like a snapshot before you do your deploy?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the options, actually, so you could build that into your release, obviously, as one of the tasks. But you'll also notice in here, one of the arguments is backup database before deployment. So you can just make it part of the deployment automatically. Okay, let's see how our release is doing, or if our release is doing anything. Back to releases, and Northwind. Oh, look! Yay! So it made it to dev. So actually, if we let's do a quick verification. So here's my dev database. I might have to refresh this, but let's see, Northwind dev tables. Yay, provinces! So provinces, now, it would have been more exciting if I'd showed you that before, because it, you guys don't know, but here, I'll show you QA.
I'm going to deploy to QA.
Exactly. So you ready? Let's have a look at QA. Oh, the speed. It's a good thing there's an animation there. Holy mackerel. That's crazy. What are you doing? Okay, we'll come back to you. So in the meantime, yeah. So when I open this guy up, you can see I've got so it went to dev, succeeded. There's a little person sitting here, so it's obviously got a pre-deployment. You'll notice because I'm the person that can approve it, I get this little yellow notice here that says, hey, pre-deployment approval is pending. So if anybody else looked at it, they wouldn't see that. They would just see it's gone to dev, and that's all they get. Here we go. So, okay, no provinces, right? Everybody, nothing under my hat? Okay, so I'm going to approve this. Do-do-do-do. Okay.
So
that's-
under the hood, is this using the DAC pack?
Yep. So it's using the DAC pack, and it's comparing to the database, and it's going, and it's generating a script to make that database the same as the DAC pack, and then it's applying it. So when you sorry, let me just finish this thought, and you can. So when you call this tool SQL package, or you call DAC operations, we just jump my only other slide. There's a whole bunch of things you can do. You can extract the schema of the database. You can publish, is what we're doing now. We're just publishing. You can script the changes out. So if you have DBAs who really don't trust the tools yet, fair enough. They're not, they might be thinking, well, hold on, you're not just pushing right into production without me seeing the script. There's just no way. So what you can do is you can still automate everything. And what you do in your release is you run this to generate the script, and then you just hand them the script. So you never have to do it. Right? You do all your same stuff you would normally do, but instead of deploying, you just have the build generate a script, and you can actually set up in the build to automatically email it to the DBA and go, here you go, run this, it's ready to go. You can run a deployment report, which will tell you what the differences are between them, an XML file that shows the differences. You can run a drift report. You don't need a DAC pack for a drift report, obviously. You just need to have an application, data tier application. I don't know where I'm going here. A data tier, I'm just walking over to the whiteboard. A data tier, your database has to be a data tier application, and the last time you deployed, it already has the DAC pack in it, so what it's going to, all you have to do is say, hey, has this database drifted, and give it the server and the database name, and it'll come back and say either no or yes, and it'll give you an XML file that shows the drift.
Well, would it prevent you from just automatically deploying the second?
No, I was thinking back to, I was thinking it would catch something like a dependency at the release point, but really the dependency would be caught when we did the build or when we
Right.
did the testing.
Yeah. Okay, let's go back and see how we're doing here. So it is in progress right now. So if I go back to here, no, it's still downloading artifacts. So it's working its way through QA. So, and when you look at the logs, you can see you get, there's my logs for dev. I get a complete history and audit trail of what happened. I can download these as a zip file if I need them. Now we get down into QA, and you can actually follow along with what it's doing. You get a console to see exactly what's happening as it goes. There's something yellow there. Should we check? Release manager? Oh yeah, that doesn't matter. And so on and so forth. So let's let it keep going. I don't know why it's taking so long, but I'm probably paying extra in Azure for that. The other thing here, oops, didn't want to go there yet. The other thing you can do with these tools is an import-export. 5, good. So if you export, what it'll do is it'll create what's called a backpack. So instead of a DAC pack, you get a backpack. And a backpack is the schema plus the data. And the data is all stored in JSON files. So you can, and generally what it's for is moving a database into Azure. So you can take a database that's on-prem, you can export it to a backpack, and then you can take that backpack and you can import it into an Azure database. And it'll move all your database schema and all its data. So that's what, if you hear the term backpack, that's what it is. Okay? So, and I had mentioned before, you can either use SQL package, and it has parameters on it that are all those things that I showed you before, the drift report and everything, they're all actions. Or you can call the API Microsoft SQL Server.DAC, and it's got an import backpack and an export backpack function. Call them from C#, call them from PowerShell, whatever you want. Let's see how we're doing now. Holy mackerel, let's take it.
It did say nothing to publish. Did it have halted?
Did it say that? I wondered if I'm just not.
There was something green underneath it.
Oh no, it was just a refresh thing. Sometimes it doesn't refresh here nicely. Okay, so let's go back to the summary. So now it's been deployed to QA and it's waiting approval. So if we go back over to QA and refresh this and wait for a long time. How many minutes do I have now? Long enough to refresh QA. That's all I need. That's all I need. Yay! There's provinces right there. So it should always be that easy, right? It's no different than it being a .NET application or a website that you're deploying. It's the same stuff you're doing. Let the tools do it. And then for QA, of course, I can approve this, and then it'll move on to production. And the people that are responsible for the environments are the ones that are coming in and going, yes, I accept this. Or yes, I'm good with this. It can go to the next stage. Not us. Okay, last thing, honest, last slide. There's one other set of tools, SQL Server BI, SQL Server Data Tools BI. This is a separate install, but you can use these to do the same stuff with the SQL Server BI tools, like analysis services, integration services, and reporting services. In integration services, it's actually very cool because it actually creates an IS pack, not a DAC pack. So you can build an SSIS project into an IS pack and then deploy it automatically, just like I did with the database. Different tools. MS Build won't build those. You have to build them with DevEnd. If anybody wants one, I've got a PowerShell script that builds all of these with DevEnd. So I got a whole BI team that everything is automated. They do everything through TFS.
Covered a lot of territory. Is there a good single source of information, or are we going to be seeking many sources?
On this? No, well, the MSDN documentation on this stuff is really good. I'm very impressed with it, yeah. Yeah, look up SQL package if you want to learn the ins and outs of the underlying what happens. But yeah, there's some good, there's even some, Laurie, what's the Microsoft Virtual Academy? That's what you were going to say, weren't you?
Yeah.
The Microsoft Virtual Academy, I believe, has labs that do this, that let you walk through a sample. Right.
Check EX.org too, because Microsoft has started putting out some self-paced courses on there as well.
Nice.
I don't know around SQL Server specifically what they have, but I know they've put a lot of Azure related stuff too, so take a look.
What was
LinkedIn
that?
Learning too.
EDX.org.
Oh, thank you.
LinkedIn Learning's got some free ones up right now after Connect.
So thanks for having me out again. That was fun. I enjoyed it. I hope you guys learned something.
Thank you, Dave, for all your hard work. Does anybody have questions for Dave? Well, I can sit up here to for a swag draw. I know you've been.
Put my granddaughter's back up there.
Computer died. Wow. So I was sitting back there. So me too.
You want to project?
Yes, please. So did anybody not receive a red ticket from Dan at the back? We're all good? All right. Sorry about this. Just a few seconds here.
I assume there's less traffic leaving Kitchener at this time.
Maybe.
I thought you guys became like the new Toronto or something, or everyone was just,
Unless you run into the light rail, then you're in trouble.
uh-oh.
It's not running.
All right. So thanks again to our full season financial sponsors, North Sail, RL Solutions, and Microsoft, as well as to our swag sponsors. For those of you who have not been here before, we're going to do a quick swag draw. So these are some of the items that we have. So we have what I've termed grab and go prizes. So we have a book. Think Like a Programmer. It's a really great book. It helps reorder your mind and to more think like a programmer. It's a great little book. An ebook gift voucher worth $50. We have a Microsoft backpack, and we also have a license from SBOs, and it's for API file management. So all of those you can just pick up and grab and go with. As well, we also have these ones. So if you choose one of these yellow box ones, please fill in your name. You can take it back to your seat, fill it in, but please return the pen and the sheet. And again, we have 2 of these PostSharp ones. They're one of our newest sponsors. So it's a PostSharp license plus a Starbucks voucher. We also have JetBrains, and we also have Codesmith tools. So you can come up and grab anything. First come, first serve. You can grab whatever you want, and we'll get Dave to do it.
All right. It's totally random, I promise. Can I get to call? Do I get to call it out?